What if I told you that behind every grand palace in Moscow, beneath every golden dome that catches the morning sun, lies a foundation built on bones? What if the price of Russia's rise to becoming one of the world's most formidable powers was paid not in gold or oil, but in human lives? Millions upon millions of them. Today, we're going to uncover the dark truth that history books often skim over. The blood-soaked path that transformed a collection of feudal principalities into the nuclear superpower we know today. This isn't just another history lesson, it's a journey into the depths of human ambition and the staggering cost of power. The story begins long before Stalin's purges, before the Bolsheviks stormed the Winter Palace, even before the Romanov dynasty painted the snow red with revolutionary blood. It starts in the medieval forests of Eastern Europe, where Viking raiders first carved their names into Slavic territories, establishing what would become the foundation of Russian civilization. But here's what they don't tell you in school. The very birth of Russian statehood was baptized in violence. The early Russian princes didn't unite the Slavic tribes through diplomacy and marriage alliances alone. They wielded the sword with ruthless efficiency, subjugating entire populations, erasing cultures, and establishing a precedent that would echo through centuries. Oleg of Novgorod, often celebrated as a founding father of the Russian state, achieved his territorial expansion through calculated brutality. While historians might romanticize his conquests as relatively bloodless compared to other medieval rulers, the reality is that thousands died to satisfy his imperial ambitions. The medieval period saw countless campaigns of expansion, each one leaving behind mass graves filled with those who dared resist Russian dominance. Entire villages vanished from maps, their populations either killed or forcibly relocated to serve the growing empire's needs. Fast forward to the reign of Ivan the Terrible, a name that should send chills down anyone's spine. Ivan didn't earn his moniker through harsh taxation or strict governance. He earned it through systematic terror. His Oprichniki, a secret police force that would inspire future generations of Russian enforcers, swept through the countryside like a plague. The sack of Novgorod in 1570 stands as one of the most horrifying examples of state-sanctioned massacre in European history. For 5 weeks, Ivan's forces tortured and killed an estimated 60,000 people, men, women, children, and clergy. Entire families were thrown into the icy Volkhov River, weighted down with stones. Imagine the terror in a mother's eyes as she watched her children disappear beneath the frozen surface. Picture the desperation of fathers trying to shield their families from soldiers who saw mercy as weakness. This wasn't warfare. This was genocide. Plain and simple. But Ivan's reign of terror was just a prelude to what was coming. The centuries that followed saw Russia expand across 11 time zones, swallowing entire nations and cultures in its insatiable hunger for dominance. Each conquest came with its own body count, its own catalog of atrocities. The colonization of Siberia wasn't the romantic adventure portrayed in Russian folklore. It was a systematic campaign of subjugation that left indigenous populations decimated. The Chukchi, the Evenks, the Yakuts, these weren't just exotic names on a map. They were entire peoples whose populations were slashed by disease, warfare, and forced labor. Russian expansion into Central Asia and the Caucasus followed the same bloody pattern. The conquest of Chechnya in the 19th century involved tactics so brutal that they would be classified as war crimes by modern standards. Entire villages were burned to the ground, their inhabitants either killed or driven into the mountains to die of exposure. Then came the 20th century, and with it, violence on an industrial scale that would make the medieval massacres look like minor skirmishes. The Russian Revolution of 1917 wasn't just a political upheaval. It was a blood-soaked carnival of revenge that consumed the country for years. The execution of Tsar Nicholas II and his family wasn't just the end of the Romanov dynasty. It was a symbolic moment that opened the floodgates to unprecedented carnage. The Bolsheviks didn't just overthrow the old order, they obliterated it with machine guns and bayonets. The Russian Civil War that followed claimed an estimated 10 million lives. 10 million. Let that number sink in. That's more than the entire population of many countries today, all dead in the name of ideological purity and political control. But even the Civil War pales in comparison to what came next. When Joseph Stalin consolidated power, he didn't just rule the Soviet Union, he terrorized it into submission. The Great Purge of 1937-1938 alone resulted in at least 750,000 executions, though many historians believe the true number was much higher. Stalin's paranoia wasn't just a personality quirk, it was a killing machine that consumed anyone perceived as a threat. Party officials, military commanders, intellectuals, farmers, factory workers. No one was safe. Families were torn apart by denunciations, children encouraged to inform on their parents. The Gulag system represents perhaps the most systematic approach to human suffering ever devised. Between 1934 and 1953, over 1 million people died in these camps, 1 million souls ground to dust in the machinery of state terror. But that's just the official count from declassified archives. the real number of those who perished in the vast network of Soviet labor camps is likely much higher. These weren't just statistics on a government report. Each number represented a person with dreams, fears, loved ones waiting for them to come home. A father who never saw his daughter grow up. A son who died calling for his mother in a language the guards couldn't understand. The collectivization campaigns that preceded and accompanied the purges were equally devastating. Stalin's war against the kulaks, successful peasants who owned their land, resulted in the deliberate starvation of millions through the Holodomor and similar famines. In Ukraine alone, between 3.5 and 5 million people starved to death while grain rotted in government warehouses. Children ate grass, bark, even clay in desperate attempts to survive. Parents made impossible choices about which of their children might have the best chance of living through another day. But here's the truly chilling part. This wasn't incompetence or bureaucratic failure. It was deliberate policy. Stalin used starvation as a weapon to break the spirit of entire populations, to demonstrate the absolute power of the Soviet state over life and death itself. The pattern didn't end with Stalin's death. Every Soviet leader who followed maintained power through the implicit threat of violence, the knowledge that dissent would be met with imprisonment, exile, or worse. The KGB didn't just spy on citizens. It disappeared them, erased them from history as if they had never existed. Even during the supposedly more liberal Khrushchev era, the machinery of repression continued to function. The Hungarian Revolution of 1956 was crushed with typical Russian brutality. Over 2,500 Hungarians killed, 200,000 forced to flee their homeland. The invasion of Czechoslovakia in 1968 followed the same script. When the Prague Spring threatened to bloom into actual democracy, Soviet tanks rolled through the streets, killing protesters and reimposing the iron discipline that had characterized Russian rule for centuries. Fast forward to the modern era, and we see the same patterns repeating. The Chechen wars of the 1990s and 2000s weren't just military conflicts. They were exercises in state terror designed to demonstrate the consequences of challenging Russian authority. Grozny was leveled, its population scattered to the winds. The apartment bombings in Moscow in 1999, which many experts believe were false flag operations, provided the justification for even more brutal crackdowns. Hundreds of innocent Russians died to create the political atmosphere necessary for renewed war in the Caucasus. And then there's Ukraine, the latest chapter in this ongoing story of Russian expansion built on bloodshed. The annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the current conflict represent not an aberration, but the continuation of a pattern that stretches back over 1,000 years. What we're witnessing isn't just geopolitical maneuvering or natural resource competition. It's the latest manifestation of a cultural and political system that has always viewed violence as the primary tool of statecraft, that sees human life as expendable in pursuit of imperial ambitions. The numbers are staggering when you add them all up. Historians estimate that between 20 and 60 million Soviet citizens died from executions, deportations, famines, and labor camps under Stalin alone. When you include the casualties from Russian expansion throughout history, the civil wars, the purges, the forced relocations, and the modern conflicts, you're looking at a death toll that dwarfs almost any other nation in history. But this isn't just about statistics, it's about understanding how power really works, how empires are built and maintained. Russia didn't become a global superpower through economic innovation or cultural achievement alone. It got there by being willing to pay a price in human lives that most other nations would find unthinkable. Every time you see the Kremlin on television, every time you hear about Russian influence operations or military interventions, remember what lies beneath. Remember the millions who died so that a small group of men in Moscow could project power across the globe. This pattern of using mass violence as a tool of statecraft hasn't disappeared. It's just evolved. The murders of journalists and dissidents, the poisoning of political opponents, the disinformation campaigns designed to destabilize democratic societies. These are all manifestations of the same underlying approach to power. The tragedy is that this cycle continues because we fail to acknowledge its true cost. We treat Russian history as a series of political events rather than recognizing it as one of the longest-running campaigns of state terror in human history. Understanding this pattern is crucial for comprehending current events. When Russia invades neighbors or interferes in foreign elections, it's not acting out of character. It's following a playbook written in blood over centuries of expansion and control. The question we should be asking ourselves is, what does it mean for the future? Can a political system built on such foundations ever truly change? Or are we doomed to watch this pattern repeat itself generation after generation? As we watch current events unfold, remember that the stakes are higher than just territorial disputes or economic interests. We're witnessing the continuation of a historical pattern that has already claimed tens of millions of lives. The only question is whether we'll find the courage to break this cycle or allow it to claim millions more. What do you think? Is this pattern of violence an inevitable part of Russian political culture, or could there be a different path forward? Have we learned enough from history to prevent these tragedies from repeating, or are we destined to watch the same bloody script play out again and again? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I want to hear how you think this story ends. If you found this deep dive into hidden history as compelling as I did researching it, make sure to subscribe to our channel. There are so many more untold stories waiting to be uncovered, so many truths that powerful people would prefer remained buried. Hit that subscribe button and join us as we continue to illuminate the dark corners of human history that textbooks are afraid to explore. The blood may have dried, but the patterns remain. Only by understanding them can we hope to change them. Tell us which country or city you're watching from. See you in the next video.